and welcome to Random Fandom Chats. I'm Tandra.
I'm Dee Dee.
And this is Annabeth. And here we talk about pretty much everything and anything that's sci-fi fantasy related, from books, comics, movies, TV shows, games, everything else. And today's topic is Buck Rogers in the 25th century.
Now, this is a show. Did you grow up watching this show when you were a kid?
I did. It was only on for 2 seasons, much like Battlestar Galactica, and it's kind of weird. They were both created by Glenn Larson.
And they were both created by the same time period, weren't they?
Right, and, well, they overlapped just a little bit. Battlestar Galactica was first, and then they kind of overlapped a little bit, and then Battlestar Galactica got canceled, and then Buck Rogers continued, and then it got canceled. So they were kind of in the same time period. They were all right after Star Wars, 78, 79, 80 time period. So they have a lot of
Star Wars influence.
Very much.
You can see that when you watch.
You can.
Now, I've seen both Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers, and I actually like Buck Rogers a little bit better.
I did too.
It's a little less boring than Battlestar Galactica.
It is. I mean, you can tell there's a lot of similarities in them in a lot of ways, and a lot of things about them. Buck Rogers was based on the characters created way back in the 30s for like comic strips and whatnot. So, or maybe even the 20s, somewhere way back. I know in the 30s they had, I've even seen some of them a long time ago, a serialized release of Buck Rogers that would come out like in the Saturday afternoon when you go to the movie theater. They would have these different serials, and they made parts of it, and Buck Rogers was part of that. So people had been very familiar with Buck Rogers and what he was about. For those of you,
kind of like a James Bond-ish type
deal. I mean, for those of you not familiar, he was an astronaut in the late 1980s that had been put into a deep space probe, and something went wrong, and somehow basically he got frozen, and he eventually is in a really large orbit around Earth, like far out, and eventually it gets him back to Earth 500 years later.
And they unthaw him.
Yeah, they unthaw him,
revive him,
and of course he's really primitive. Of course, they still speak English,
but they bring up that he says a lot of phrases and words that they're just like, what's that mean?
Yeah, he'll say things and they're like, I have no clue what you're talking about. But there's, he's trying to help defend the planet against evildoers or people trying to take it over.
Now, one thing that they did with the pilot movie is that they really made it seem like, because there was this huge war. There was like this, was it a nuclear war?
Yeah, it was supposed to be a nuclear war.
This nuclear war that basically made most of Earth uninhabitable. They had this one area called the inner city, which, from what I understood, was kind of like a domed area where everything was regulated, temperature, and that was pretty much the only place that humanity thrived. And
later on, they mention other cities too, but basically there's just these pockets,
of humanity. But the one that he primarily takes place in is where Chicago is.
Yeah, New Chicago.
And in the first episode, they show him venturing out into the wastelandy part of the world, and he encounters these mutants who almost kill him and whatnot, and it's just really bad. But they actually changed that after the pilot movie. They decided to go ahead and present like a better, vision of the future where not everything was a wasteland. They still had the whole inner city of New Chicago and whatnot like that, but when they showed the other parts of Earth, it was always like this lush green land. Now, which do you think is better? Do you think they really should have stuck with the more like nuclear Holocaust type deal, or do you think you like that they changed it? Which do you think is better?
Well, I always kind of like happier, hopeful things, so I always kind of like that. And there's always bad guys and people out there who was fighting regardless, so there was always conflict.
So you really didn't need the extra conflict of the wastelandy part of the Earth.
One of the things I liked about Buck Rogers was it tended to be a little more happy.
Lighthearted, and definitely more comedic.
They had a little bit more comedy in it. Tweaky, which is the robot,
he's hilarious.
He's great. I love him. A lot.
He's definitely a lot like R2 in my opinion.
In a
lot
of ways, and he has a Dr. Theopolis, which is a computer. Basically, he carries around a lot on his chest.
Sentient computer.
Yeah, and he's one of the planet's leaders, and he tends to be, a little bit more cerebral and,
very wise
and trying to keep Tweaky in line, and so they pal around and they do things, and Buck's always trying to stop whatever nefarious plot. I love the main female lead played by Erin Gray, Colonel Daring. I thought she was great.
Yeah, I thought her character was really great because we mentioned this before, and but having strong female characters like that, and she was a colonel, right? I thought she was an admiral, but she was a colonel, and that's a pretty prominent position for a female to be holding.
Well, and she orders Buck Rogers around all the time, and
she's very tough. She's a skilled, fighter pilot and whatnot, which I thought was pretty good. I know that they really dumbed down her character a lot as the series progressed. As the series progressed, they really started doing less and less with her character. They dumbed her down, started putting her in this more mini-skirt type uniform. She didn't really do a lot except kind of fawning over Buck a lot, which annoys me, but at least she started out really cool.
Yeah, they
at least they had good intentions starting out.
Well, and the show, from the very beginning, had it to where the female characters were definitely sexual objects. I mean,
she was less so than.
Less so, but I mean, the main villain, Princess Ardala. She, is in a bikini throughout most of the pilot episode.
Basically, a lot like Leia's metal bikini in Return of the Jedi.
Very close with a cape and the whole thing, and and she walks around and she swishes and does the whole thing. I'm thinking that's not natural.
It's like people don't walk like that.
But and Colonel Daring, I remember you making a comment when we were watching one episode. She gets done flying and she comes out of her thing and she takes off her helmet and everything. And
her hair is all it's down and it's all flowing like Farrah Fawcett hairdo type deal. It's like, no, a military woman would not have her hair down like that, especially after just coming back from fighting in a starship.
Most of the time it's pulled up and whatever, but they needed to make her look more glamorous during that scene.
Well, I noticed because in that second episode after the pilot movie, that's when they started doing that, and sometimes they would show her with her hair still back, like when she was on official duty or whatever, but a lot of times, even when she was on official duty, she had her hair down when she was in scenes with Buck, I noticed, because, she has to be pretty for Buck, I guess. I don't know. But that didn't annoy me a lot. It was just like, that's just unrealistic. But of course, it's a product of its time. Yeah, you gotta take your wins where you can get them. But they really started doing stuff like that with her more and more as the series progressed, especially in season 2, I do believe, which was kind of upsetting. But like I said, at least she started out pretty good.
What I always found kind of interesting about this and Battlestar Galactica both is they had such a huge impact on a lot of people's thoughts on science fiction and stuff, and they only lasted 2 seasons each, and each of them only had 1 season that was only 13 episodes long.
Yeah.
Battlestar Galactica's second season was only like 13 episodes in this.
But stuff didn't really last that many seasons a lot back then.
A lot of
them only lasted 2 or 3 seasons, and that was it, shows that lasted, like 18 seasons or even 10 were practically unheard of, except for like in the case of things like Doctor Who and whatnot.
Right. Now that's funny, you mentioned Doctor Who, because in the UK, Buck Rogers aired opposite Doctor Who and actually made the ratings for Doctor Who go down.
Because people were going to see Buck Rogers
and it was actually
Doctor Who.
And it was actually like in its 16th or 18th season or something at the time that it aired. So they changed Doctor Who's night to
get its ratings back up.
Interesting. Which is kind of interesting because Doctor Who's ran for eons and eons. And so it's kind of funny because, back in the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s a lot of times, but definitely in the 70s and 80s, a lot of science fiction shows did not last more than 1 season, 2 seasons, 3 seasons, and that was it.
Yeah, 3 seasons is kind of the max.
Kind of the max on most
Whenever I watched stuff during that time period, the original Star Trek, Wonder Woman, things like this.
They're always 2, 3 seasons.
It only lasted like 2 or 3 seasons.
Right, and so, I think it's because a lot of times they didn't know what to do with them.
Yeah, they didn't know how to keep the story going and keep it interesting and fresh. A lot of times they kind of always wanted to rehash things.
They cost a lot of money to produce. They weren't sure who, in what way to keep them interesting for everybody to want to watch and things like that. I think it was just, and the producers I think were frankly quite confused by science fiction. I don't think they didn't really know how to exploit it. I don't think they really knew how to
deal with the fact that it was a science fiction show, but it was also still just a show. Like, they didn't know whether or not they should make it more science-y and more realistic, or if they should really just stick with it being just a TV show for people to enjoy, or what.
Right. And so I think they had, a lot of times these shows would go through different producers by the second, third seasons. They would go through different writers. They would change how it's presented. And that was common for a lot of these at the time. And I think that made it hard for them to stay on the air. It made it hard to get a good fan base going and a good audience going. And this is back in the days in which we don't have TiVo, we don't have Netflix, we don't have Hulu.
Once it aired, and if you didn't see it, you didn't see it.
Until the summer when reruns came along. And so to get interested in the show and stay interested in the show, you had to tune in every week. So they had to make you want to see the next episode and want to see the next one. And you had to do it every week.
It wasn't like today where if you don't miss it, I can just catch it on Hulu or online.
Right, and
somewhere.
so a lot of times you might watch 4 or 5 episodes in one night. And that didn't happen back then. And we didn't have VCRs to record them and all that. And so I think shows had a harder time building up that fan base and getting people
those
that wanted
reoccurring people that would come back every single
week.
week.
I think they had a hard time with that. So, but I found it so interesting that when they didn't really last that long, but they still seem to have such a huge impact. Because I remember both Battlestar Galactica and this growing up going, oh, I love those shows. And maybe it's because we just didn't have that many shows to pull from back then.
But you got what you got, and you just, took whatever was
But I thought
available.
some of these were very fun to watch. I enjoy rewatching them again for nostalgia's sake. If you can overlook, the datedness of it, the computer screens, you can tell it's very much the Star Wars era. The ships are very similar to Star Wars. The fighter pilots are very similar when they're doing their joystick maneuvers and they're trying to, go and fight other starfighters. They got this computer screen with just these little blips on it.
Yeah, you mentioned how you found it interesting that back in these early science fiction stuff, they really didn't rely on computer technology a lot in those older science fiction.
Well, yeah, because like the plot of Star Wars, they have to stop using the computer to target, the Death Star. So in this one, the same thing happens when they're fighting off some of the pirates that are out there. They're having trouble getting them and all, but when they don't, when he goes to manual, and that's another charm of Buck is they sometimes will use his knowledge of tactics and things from 500 years before
to his advantage.
Because things are supposedly more sterile and better and whatever, and he's a little bit more primitive, and so he can come up with these
Neanderthal
things.
to them, basically.
Yeah, a little bit, so he can kind of go through and go, no, we should do it this way. This is how people fight, or this is the way humans are, and whatnot. And so that that was kind of interesting. But it was interesting that their computers, they never seemed to try to upgrade their computers to much bigger than what the technology was at the time. They never tried to envision what they
type
could
of role
be.
computers would take. Well, it's because I don't think people really saw computers as having such an important
Maybe
part
not,
of
because
life. computers were barely a thing back then, of course.
Well, yeah, I mean, other than for business use and whatnot, they were barely starting to get into some homes, and we're talking very, very few. They had limited uses.
Very expensive.
They were very expensive. They, couldn't see a lot on them. Video games were just barely starting to come out, and
there were things like Pong.
Yeah, well, we're a little past Pong, but yeah, right around there.
Oh, yeah, Pong was in the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit better than that. But yeah, and so it's funny because when they show the computers, there's still these big computers with lights on them, or they have these computers in their cockpits that show just these little blips,
It's not like detailed maps, it's just
it's nothing like what we have nowadays. And so it's interesting that a lot of times they didn't trust the computers, and you can tell people didn't trust computer technology because a lot of times they were like, no, don't use the computer, go ahead and use your own wits, it's much better. It's going to get you there better and faster. And that was a common theme a lot of times in these shows, I think, during the time period. So that was kind of interesting.
It's interesting
when you go back and you notice these things that you didn't notice back when you first watched them.
Whereas nowadays, and stuff they make now in science fiction, people always rely on computers and...
Probably more than they should, but that's the point.
That's how our society is already, so...
Unless you have a show specifically in which computers have been wiped out or whatever.
Or taking over the Earth.
Yeah, that too.
Theme. They love computers taking over the Earth. Now, one thing that you had mentioned is that the actress who played Wilma is kind of an important figure in stars going to conventions nowadays.
Yeah, she actually has a website called Heroes for Hire, and it's where you can go on and look at different actors and cosplayers and writers and other people
Artists.
that you may want to have at a convention or
Like a
other
guest star
or other
whatnot.
speaking appearance. And you can, there's like a form you can fill out and everything, and and she's kind of like an agent for these people to help them get to these conventions and things. She goes to quite a few, from what I can tell when I've looked online, kind of looking her up. She's a lot of pictures of her at different cons.
So that's an interesting little tidbit.
That's kind of cool, and it's also, I didn't even know there was a place like that where you could go find these people.
know.
So
I never knew how these people who run these conventions got a hold of them. It's like, how do you get a hold of these stars and their agents?
You have to find their agents and talk to them and go, hey, do they want to go to a convention? So this is kind of a nice, I don't know if she has everybody, but I was looking at her website, just kind of looking through it, and there was a lot of people on there that had been in a lot of different stuff. Amy Acker was on there, and I can't even remember lots of names of different people. The one that was in Jack of All Trades and was in Burn Notice and
Bruce.
Yeah, Bruce. Yeah,
Bruce. I can't remember his last name.
I know, right? It just all of a sudden.
And it's funny because I was just talking about.
But
him
I
on
remember
that show
seeing
a
his
couple days
picture
ago.
on there.
Campbell. Bruce Campbell.
Thank you.
That was it. Bruce Campbell.
Yeah, and he, was on there, and so, there's lots of different variety of people. There were some that, it lists what different things they've been in on. Some was in Battlestar Galactica and this and that.
Kind of their little portfolio.
Yeah, and some said writer, director, actor, whatever, so you knew what they were and stuff. So that would be, if you ever want to set up a con or, whatever, and want to hire some people, it's a great website.
Yeah, it's a good place to start.
Yeah, I'm thinking so. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to find out about her. She did like Buck Rogers, because she liked the idea that she was a colonel and was in charge,
and
and
she
that
was cool,
women could
and
do
she
this
was-
kind of thing, and so I think from that point of view she appreciated it. Her and Gil Gerard, the guy who played Buck Rogers, they actually played in a webisode where they played the character's parents.
Really?
I haven't seen it or anything, but that might be interesting to try to check out and see how good that is. And so that could be interesting too.
Yeah. All right. Well, you ready to pick our
Go
topic
ahead
for
and
next time?
grab it and we'll see what we're gonna do for next. Yeah, Beth, what you got here? Yeah, you're already ready to look at that.
You want to pick it out this time, yeah, baby?
Yeah, she's wagging her tail. She's ready.
Alrighty. Which one you
Oh,
want?
that one.
Pink
She went straight for that one. All right. Which one is it? Wonder Woman from TV.
Ooh. That's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, and we're still back in the 70s, so all right.
Yeah, we're going to have to break out some of our Wonder Womans and watch them.
Okay.
Alright, if you guys like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. If you like what we do, consider subscribing. If you have any comments about the TV show, what you thought of it, if this video makes you want to watch it, make sure to tell us in the comments, and feel free to leave suggestions that we can put in our box for future episodes.
Tell all your friends, and we'll see you next time.